Well, hello, Endow ladies. Simone here, and I am with the lovely Helen Alvaré, who I'm sure many of you already know and follow. But Helen, welcome to the Endow podcast.
It's great to be with you, Simone.
I'm so happy to have this conversation with you. And for those that don't know Helen, she's law professor at George Mason. Still at George Mason, Helen? Yes, great. And she's a wife, a mother, an incredible expression of the feminine genius. And Helen, you're up to a bunch of things. What are you up to these days?
Oh my gosh. So I'm writing a religious freedom book that's really for Catholic institutions. Just came out with a co-edited book about Christianity and conscience and the meaning of conscience across a huge variety of Christian traditions. I just got a Templeton grant to do a conference on sort of the positive gift of religious freedom in the United States.
Wow.
Working with the Vatican at the Organization for American States on their women's stuff. Working with the Vatican Secretary of State on assisting bishops' conferences to have really high quality guidelines for handling complaints of clerical sex abuse. And cooking a lot for my vegan middle child who is home because of COVID. So a few things.
I'm just suddenly feeling really better about my schedule.
That's good.
That's fantastic, Helen. Thank you so much. That's great. I mean, of course, I want to just talk to you about everything, but you know, being such a productive woman and contributing in so many fruitful ways for all of us, for the church and for the world, how do you conceive of your personal vocation? Because I like to talk about personal vocation a lot because it's more than just your job. It's more than just your state in life. It's you. It's everything. So, who is Helen in your mind, in your imagination?
Yeah, in my dreams. No, in reality. I'm surprised to find myself long married and the mother of children. I always thought I would be single. The marriage vocation is, and parenting, I mean, it sort of drags you kicking and screaming into the relentless world of trying to be a better person.
Yes.
Constantly. And I'm just shocked at how persistent is the call to be a better person. You know, I've been married 36 years. For work, I've always been what my daughter euphemistically calls, you know, an active relaxer. I like to do things in order to relax. I was always going to be working. I was working as a kid, working as a teen, etc. And even if I wasn't paid for it, I would be trying to figure out what the Catholic Church is saying about things, and then attempting in the dialogue of faith and reason, letting the church's light about the human being, about the world, about God's love, shed light on how we ought to deal with things. Yeah. And the things that I've mostly dealt with are sex, marriage, parenting, and now those in the context of the state trying to sort of bully us to do other than our beliefs. So that has been such a clear call to me to come to know the legal field and then to explain it in ways that other people can understand, but by the light of the encounter with Christ. And so there's a lot of work to be done there once I describe my vocation that way, you know?
I love it. And I love that you're because you also not just have a background in law, but also in theology. So you have that beautiful formation of kind of the precision of faith, and then that dynamic relationship between that from the divine science to then our very specific legal
and I have to say to anybody, you know, people say, oh, you know, I'm not an academic, or I don't have time to do a lot of reading, but what it's really just exploded on me more in my last, you know, 10-20 years of work, that if we really believe what we say we believe, then what that opens up for us as ways of responding to things that are, the world will say, oh, either, wow, that really accounts for reality, or, oh my gosh, that's really innovative. I wouldn't have thought about that. And these are not like impossible intellectual ideas to achieve after years of reading. They are taking time to think about what we really believe, which means that we really do have to come into really regular contact with Jesus's voice in Scripture, with the apostles' voice, with the best church documents, that they really, I mean, I'm just so blown away by how they keep giving me new angles.
Yeah.
And most of my writing starts with an insight from the faith that is not irrational, it's fully rational. But then I apply it to some reasonable problem.
Right.
And to the extent it's innovative, it's just because Christianity is so innovative.
Oh, I love that. I have all these sorts of thoughts in my mind going on about just like what you're describing in terms of like prudence, right? Like you're taking this like wisdom and then like the practical application of it in your circumstance, in your vocation as a law professor, as a lawyer, all these things. And that the inspiration is coming from the faith. So, you know, I always come back to this question of like, yes, women, endowed women are interested in the intellectual life, and it's not impractical because
No,
it's not, I mean, it's worthy for its own sake, but then like you said, it has practical and cultural value that is worth cultivating. So
and we have to think really hard right now. You know, we're being asked to accept, you know, that green is yellow and up is down. And it's very easy to get caught up in things. I mean, I even look back in my life. I remember when I was a young mom, and there was a flurry about, what are you doing with your children for the summer? And, oh, they have to be in this and that improvement program, and they have to be in this camp.
That's stressful. So stressful.
Oh, we're going to do some event for the kids at school. And then it becomes stressful. And then if you don't, so this is why you have to think. It doesn't have to be comprised of reading books this thick to be a thinker. To apply your intellect, you have to step back and go, whoa, wait a minute, outside the bubble. I think, you know, Luigi Giussani has a phrase that he uses, the common mentality, right? Whenever he says, I could just see the bile dripping from both sides of his mouth. Oh, the common mentality.
You're speaking my language now, Helen.
Yes, but I have to remind myself, whenever I get caught up in something, wait. And it's not as simple as, you know, the sort of what would Jesus do? It requires a fair amount of prayer and really reflection on the radicality of his love.
Yeah.
You know, he wasn't kidding. He really is that demanding.
Actually, that is like my interior dialogue every day. That's so funny you say that, where I'm just like, gosh, Lord, you're just like asking me a lot. And you're asking a lot of my emotional intelligence, like to reflect, to think, to discern, to decide, and then to be obedient. And of course, there's, you know, another Giussani phrase, the resistance, right? We call it original sin in our, you know, Catholic tradition, but the internal resistance to my ideas versus God's ideas in the day. It was just like that little.
Yes.
You know, it just gets to us. I love what you're saying too. And I think the woman that saves me from from the common mentality is always my mother. I always go back to my mother, who's like so big on like, who says? Because my little Catholic bubble says, or because so-and-so said, who says, you know? So
that's great.
I have to thank her for that. She's, you know, she's an original presence. Another.
Yes.
An original presence, you know, very much shatters any of my ideologies that want to spring up. So I'd love to talk to you about religious freedom, and especially when we're talking what you brought up about sex, marriage, and parenting, because, well, you know, being as I'm a first generation immigrant, it's like we came to the United States because of religious freedom matters and all. So this is a big deal. And just knowing how to respond to that. But before I ask you about that, I would love to know just how John Paul II, his letter to women, Mulieris Dignitatum, his letter on the nature and dignity of women. What was your experience of those being written, coming out, reading it? Like, what did it do for you as a woman? Because there's so many facets to you.
I'm going to be frank. I had two reactions. One was that a great intellect was taking women seriously. And that only was deepened as I came to know more about his life and the people he hung out with and the people he talked to, that he really did value women as equals. And I also thought that what he described at a theological level accounted for reality at an empirical and experiential level. This sense of being attuned to the other, this capacity for the other that he talks about.
Yeah.
At the same time, I was really put off by it when it first came out.
I love it.
I hadn't had children yet, and I resented the level of orientation toward children that he indicated women had.
Wow.
I really did. I wrote about this in my book, Breaking Through. But the very first chapter is called Fear of Children. And that was really strong in me. I didn't see why I'd been breaking my neck to read and so much and to get so many, degrees or to publications or whatever, if I was just going to give all that up and spend all that time on children. I felt very strongly about that.
Right.
And excuse me, I've got allergies here in DC. And the idea that the woman taught the parenthood to the man, I was like, no. He needs to step up 50-50 from second number one. And it was only then becoming a mother, and it wasn't only that I, had children, but I also miscarried several children, that I began to see that he was onto something. Right. And this awareness of the other. That said, I still think I'm thinking of my own husband, fully 50% and more, whatever the occasion demanded. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't take away that there is something about the woman's reflection on who all is in the room, what are they experiencing, that on average, I think he was so right about. Yeah. But sometimes I thought that when he spoke about women, and I continue to feel this way, there was a sentimentality due to the loss of his own mother when he was so young. Wow. And I am not like sweet or soft in the way that he described it. And so I always sort of, I thought Edith Stein did the same thing. There was a tiny bit of stereotyping in there that I just wanted to pull out, like a couple of stray threads on a really otherwise fabulous garment. And so my reaction was mixed until I grew a little and came to understand, right, now having lived a much longer life, that he was onto something about the nature of women and the complementarity in particular, the way this works. Not simply in marriage, but in any work or friendship or other relations with men.
That's so interesting. I on my end of things, it was more like, is it very feminine geniusy to like talk about the feminine genius? That was my like instinctual reaction, and then later, growing in that, and that there's a whole story there too, kind of my own healing in terms of femininity, because I'm kind of with you, and at least my self-perception, or in Middle Eastern women, like, yeah, we're like really tough. So, it's just kind of. I remember
what my grandfather said to me once on the Cuban side. We're first generation in the United States. I am. Nice. And his greatest compliment to me was that I should have been a man. And, I grew up with that kind of feminism. And so telling me all about my openness to children and everything, I was like, and then I experienced it, but I wasn't open to it when it first came out.
Yeah, that's interesting. My sister, one of our favorite mentors, told her, you would have made a great boy, and she's just like, thank you, I think, yeah. But anyway, there's more. We have to get kind of beyond the sentimentality and the stereotypes into the fact that, yeah, each woman, each man, each human is a manifestation of God's glory in a totally unique and different way. So yes. I've been dying to pick your brain about that one. So about religious freedom, please educate us. How are we supposed to think about this? How are we supposed to?
Yeah, so, there's so many levels. There's the pride in the United States being this beacon, which it has been for a very long time, and we're hoping it continues to be. There, however, is this sort of a slide toward the more European, the European Union, et cetera, conception of it, which is as follows. Religion is not that intellectual. It's fideistic. It's a matter of faith, not reason. We're afraid of fanatics since 9/11, but we've always been afraid of them. And And then today, the most persistent charge is, and you're on the wrong side of history because you really aren't buying into the new sexual orthodoxy. So even though there is a variety of clashes between religion and the state nowadays, the one that seems to be getting the most airtime, and frankly is generating thousands of lawsuits, is the clash between the new sexual orthodoxy and religious freedom. And of course, we're kind of shocked in a sense. I mean, it's been coming for a long time, but there was always, the laws, even though they were not religious, tended to agree with what would have been Jewish, Christian, Muslim, most people's notion about what was sane and good and healthy and loving sex, marriage, parenting practices. Now the government is at war with all the leading religions teaching about this. And we have to think, I think we're not doing an excellent job of responding. I'm writing a book on that theory, that we are not doing an excellent job responding.
Right. So how when you say the new sexual orthodoxy, I think I know what you mean by that. Yeah. But for our listeners, how would you explain that?
Right. There is no important connection between sex, marriage, and parenting. Yeah. Sex has subjective weight if you choose to give it to it, but it has no objective weight. The only ethical rule regarding sex is that it be consensual.
Yeah.
There is no natural sexual orientation that most people have. There is no moral or practical or spiritual difference between being interested in persons of the same sex, of the opposite sex, and that sex itself is simply a social construct. It is not actually an objective thing rooted in biology, which then has like physiological or psychological or emotional, spiritual, cognitive effects.
There's no objective reality, material or spiritual, actually.
It's all whatever is in your little head today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Couldn't have said it better myself. What's in your head today could be different tomorrow, and somehow we all must tiptoe around what may or may not be in your head today about what you think reality is. So I'm a firm believer that culture obviously is what dictates what happens politically, and that women are very powerful forces in creating a beautiful Catholic culture, Christian culture, or just one based on the true, the good, the beautiful, that, anybody who affirms universal human nature and dignity and good anthropology. So for Endow women and Catholic women in general who are listening to this, how are we to respond? I'm going to ask you to summarize your baby.
Really. Well, the first thing is a note of hope. Remember that every major elite institution has been shoving abortion on demand down our throats since the late 60s.
Yeah.
And yet, we are not only alive, but we're thriving as a pro-life movement. And even when I started to get super active in the late 80s, from there till today, if you look around, women are leading the charge, and that has changed things. It's hard for you to imagine, because of your age and women younger than you even, who don't understand. And sometimes an anecdote captures it. If in 1989 I told people that I was working on pro-life issues for the US Catholic bishops, I could silence both rows on either side of me of an airplane. Somebody catch it. Now people will say, oh, I may or may not agree with you, but I get where you're coming from. Mm-hmm. Because women have so prominently told the truth about their experiences, about the unborn, about mothering, about the value of children. Women, we have led opening over 3,000 crisis pregnancy centers. Women are running all the major pro-life groups, and so on and so forth. So that's just to give people a note of hope, to tell you that.
Love the hope.
It's so true.
Yep.
And the second thing is that you need both content and tone or style, right?
Yeah.
You need to know things, but you also need to know how to communicate them in a way that's loving, which indicates that you really need to stop and think and remember that you love the people you're talking to.
Yes. Be
And
rooted in love.
right,
Be rooted in love. Always. Yes.
always. And that takes almost, that famous line in Benedict's Deus Caritas Est, my favorite encyclical of all encyclicals, where
Deus Caritas Est is your favorite encyclical?
of all time.
We have an Endow study on it. It's
The best.
It's also one of my favorites because, hello, Ratzinger,
And in it, he makes the statement, is the Christian demand to love, are we really saying every person? And he says, yes, every person deserves from you that look of love they crave.
Yeah.
So it's human need and your ability come together. And so whatever it is, whether you're trying to stir up in someone, to stop and reflect about the value of unborn human life, or the woman's actual relationship, the most important one in nature of symbiosis, of interactivity, of interdependence. The irony, of course, is that the whole world is on its feet screaming for greater kindness, greater respect for diversity alongside equality, greater, embrace of the idea that we owe one another, that we're relational. They're screaming for this, but somehow they set the sex, marriage, and parenting questions to the side of this. And I like to say to people, sort of the main thing that's been going through my head on how to speak to people about this in the last year while I'm writing a book on this is to say, for those who think that these pelvic issues are just that, they're moralism, they're our made up rules in order to cut out people who we don't like because we don't like sex, we don't like gay, we don't like transgender, we don't like people who are not a certain way. That when you really think about it, you have to go back and realize that from the earliest days, Christians were famous for their sexual ethic. It was one of the most famous things about them. You should read Kyle Harper's book, Shame to Sin, or Rodney Stark's The First 1,000 Years of Christianity. It was one of the most famous things about the Christians is how husbands and wives treated one another, how parents stopped aborting and infanticiding their children, how men could not bring home a second wife, how divorce was forbidden. And I realized that there's limit cases where we can say, oh my goodness, and it's not about our judging. It's about how were we to live to reflect the love God has for us, this pretty radical love for others. This has been true since the beginning. We've held on to it for 2,000 years. And now today, in the midst of all of this new claiming that the rules have changed, we have never had more empirical evidence that indicates that the Christian prescription is what assists the poor, assists women, assists young women, assists young men, assists couples as they grow old, assists children, would bring the races into greater harmony without such a drastic division between family forms and family income. So this idea that Good Samaritan love is the people strewn in your path, for most of us, as important as it is that we are welcoming to immigrants and caring for the person on death row, for most of us, the actual opportunity, that great line in the Brothers Karamazov, love in action versus love in dreams. Love in dreams is that we're saving every stranded child on the border. Love in action for most of us
is very small.
Is going to be taking care of the person who's using the bathroom too long in the hall down from us. And I just,
is the truth.
and it also has intense effects on lives.
Yes.
The way we do or do not take care of our children, the way we do or do not model faithful, permanent, fruitful love, the way we do or do not make ourselves ready in a sexual relationship to receive the child that's given in that. So I think when we respond to these religious freedom challenges, we never just state the rule. We don't do contraception. Right. We don't, recognize same-sex marriage. And we say from our beginning, in our following Christ and wanting to love as he loved and give people a foretaste of a society governed by the kingdom of God, this is how we've tried to live. We're still trying. It's harder. these no's are only because of the great yes to try to love as God is loving. And we will tell you that the results of these ways of loving are what you really long for, what we wish society was doing, because we would be a lot better off.
Oh my gosh. Amen. What do I
Amen.
have with that? Nothing. And that's what, like, I love that you brought up kind of the early church, because women's liberation in the first century was consecrated virginity. Like that, like that.
That is what's so fascinating. There's this book by Mike Aquilina, who's this great, very popular theologian.
I love Mike.
And he wrote this book about the great Catholic women of the early church. I think every girl like 13 and over should read this book. And he says, do you realize how few ways there were for women to be outstanding? And he said, and all of them were derivative. You were outstanding as the wife of X or the mother of X. You were never outstanding between you and God. You were never just a good person and a model. And he says here, yes, it was always in community. What they did to be outstanding was their love. But he said martyrdom, celibacy. They were great teachers of the faith. They were the rich widows. There's a great historical account by Rodney Stark that says one of the reasons why the early church was so disproportionately female was because it urged widows not to remarry, because they wanted them to reflect the unity of God and his people, Christ in the church. And so there were all these rich widows with money that they gave the church. It was also the case that women were so crazy about the idea that their husbands couldn't bring another woman home. They didn't have to kill the girl children. They didn't have to have an abortion. He wasn't going to divorce them by saying, I divorce you 3 times. That women were this really disproportionate portion of the early church. And then because the Romans were not having enough babies, the Catholic women married the Roman men and they converted.
Yeah.
It's a great and of course ironic story that our sex, marriage, and parenting teachers were what caused the church to grow, when now it's being said that it's hateful of women. I mean, it's a great irony.
But the truth is, when you really have those deep friendships with people who may have the completely opposite faith and worldview as you, and you just have a real, humble, down-to-earth, loving conversation, they want all the same things. They want unconditional love. They want healthy family life. I mean, the heart is the same.
Yes.
So we can tap into more of that, right?
Yes.
And maybe not get off social media, but get more into like deep love for our neighbors' lives, where we can get to that point where we can really have those conversations. I mean, I had this friend who, she's one of my best friends from college, and couldn't be more different politically, religiously, anything. And she came over to a party I was hosting, and we were not talking religion. We were not talking politics. We were not talking any of it. But she asked everybody at the end of the party, are you all going to be at mass tomorrow? And I'm like shocked. Why is she asking? Because she knew she's going to go with me to mass, because, she's with me, it's the weekend, whatever. But she wanted to see everybody again. And she said, I love the way you all are with each other.
Yes.
And I don't know what she's talking about. And a friend said to me, oh, she recognized Christ among you. And
yes.
I know. This is like the Christian thing here.
It's the thing. It's why and forgive me for bringing it back to the law, when a judge says you have to keep a person in your midst at a Catholic institution who thinks you're hateful because you won't accept their sexual choices, you have to keep a person who's on social media saying something terrible about the church or you or your teachings. The idea that would not impact the community in a way that would change what that Catholic institution is trying to be. The idea that would not reduce its witness and therefore its mission is so unbelievably either aggressive or just stupid. And we have to we have to do in a legal pleading and in a public discussion of our Catholic institutional religious freedom, just what you described.
we can't cancel each other. We have to be able to talk.
Exactly. Great line.
I love it. I love it. And actually it has been it's been a difficult friendship in that sense, but it has been over 20 years of saying, without, now we throw the word cancel culture all the time, but of saying, this was a hard conversation. We're going to continue to occasionally, because our friendship can't be always done.
Yeah. We can test it every day.
But we're going to continue to have these discussions, and it's been beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Helen, for this conversation. I've tremendously enjoyed it. Any other parting thoughts? Thank you, Helen.
No, I always say plenty. I wish the women who are studying this are such, they've already selected as people who are searching for something in a beautiful way. And I just want to say that it's very rewarding, even if, they're probably doing it as a matter of intellect and emotion and spirit. But even if you only engage one of those, it's rewarding.
Oh, thank you. That's fantastic advice. Fantastic framework for having these. So,
well, it's great to see you, Simone. Take care.
Thank you.